only brave thing I might have ever done in my life was once I worked at a mafia nightclub in Youngstown, Ohio. I was 19. I was 19 years old, right? And I didn't know shit about the mafia. My father was the baddest motherfucker I'd ever seen. So the mafia didn't mean shit to me. I did not relate to the mafia. Right? And I worked with this lady, Satin Doll. She was the star of the show. Beautiful black stripper, right? Because usually in those days, they had like, in clubs, they had a singer and a stripper and an MC. I was the MC. And she was the first black star I ever met. Satin Doll. Jack, because Duke Ellington had written a tune about her. You know, that's what she used to dance to and act. She was beautiful. She was 60 then. Oh, this bitch was fine though, man. I'm not lying. Lena Horne didn't have shit on her. And she was crying backstage, you know, I got to get to Buffalo. They won't pay me. I said, who won't pay you? Club owners won't. I said, oh, that motherfucker going to pay me. Bet that. And now, this is how ignorant I was. I had a cap pistol. You know them blank starter pistols? I busted into the office with this motherfucker in my, all right, give me the money, motherfucker. Doing my best black shit, you know. You know, that shit usually scare Whitey to death. And these motherfuckers didn't do nothing. And I'm sure that those men are sitting in that room today laughing. Because that's what this dude, he just started laughing. This fucking kid. Hey, wait a minute. Hey, Tony, come here. Wait a minute, Rich, do the gun again. Hey, Tony, come here. Stick up. This fucking kid, come here, you fucking kid. He's got a pair of goosies on him, Fucking kid, come here, goddamn. They like the...
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Wasden Wednesday, December the 20th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the military shorts, the 33 strategies of war, and SEAL Team 6. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, the military shorts.
Penetrating concrete bunkers or underground facilities is no easy task for any modern military. As such, worldwide governments hide their most valuable secrets, such as their nuclear arsenals, below layers of soil, rock, and reinforced cement. Still, as tensions continue rising between the United States and countries like China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran, the U.S. Air Force has come up with the world's most powerful bunker buster bomb, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP. The satellite-guided weapon weighs 30,000 pounds, carries over 5,300 pounds of high explosives, and can break through 200 feet of pure concrete. And with so much power, not even North Korea and China will be able to hide from its devastating effect.
The rift between Israel and America is widening rapidly as the U.S. is beginning to delay weapons sales, issue demands, and leak intelligence showing how bloody Israel's war has been as Israel continues to defy it. With the U.S. allegedly delaying the sale of over 20,000 M16s to Israel because of attacks by extremist Israeli settlers against Palestinians. The Biden administration reportedly feels that Israel isn't doing enough to stop settler violence, while Israel publicly claims that the U.S. is exaggerating the issue. And this comes on top of a report from Israeli media that outraged the White House that the national security minister secretly ordered police to not arrest violent settlers. And last week, the U.S. imposed sanctions on dozens of settlers whom they believe were involved in violence in the West Bank. And the White House told Israel that it wants it to wrap up its ground campaign within the next 3 weeks and transition to a special forces approach. And now U.S. intelligence has started leaking to CNN about Israel, with a new intelligence assessment finding that 40 to 45% of all bombs Israel has dropped were unguided, with the rest being precision-guided munitions. A stunning finding that, if true, completely obliterates the claim that they're trying to minimize civilian casualties. Also on Monday, the State Department said that Israel is no exception to the U.S. policy that anyone receiving its weapons must comply with the laws of war.
Did helicopter scout pilots have the most dangerous job in Vietnam? Flying in OH-6 helicopters or Loaches, these pilots flew at treetop level, often as slow as 45 to 60 miles per hour in search of enemies on the ground. Known as hunters, they were easy targets, but that was the point. By drawing out enemy fire, Loaches would help reveal North Vietnamese troops hiding in thick jungles and fields. Once spotted, Cobras circling high above would act as the killers, firing rockets, machine guns, or grenade launchers on the enemy. But while both hunters and killers took tremendous risks, it was the Loach pilots who really put themselves in harm's way. In fact, a mission was often considered a failure if you weren't fired upon. Eventually, the North Vietnamese started using shoulder-launched heat-seeking missiles, which could take out a Loach before its crew even knew what hit them. It's no surprise, then, that of 1,419 Loaches built, over half were destroyed in Vietnam, making these scouting missions one of the most dangerous jobs of the war.
He once said about himself, "Sometimes I am two people." He enlisted in the Air Force at the age of 18 and was assigned to the 12th Radio Squadron of the U.S. Air Force Security Service in Landsberg, West Germany, where he worked as a Morse code operator, intercepting Soviet Army transmissions. He was Staff Sergeant Johnny Cash, and on March 5, 1953, while monitoring Soviet Morse code chatter, he became the first American to learn of the death of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. He quickly transcribed the communique and shared it with his superiors, who informed the White House. Of course, Sergeant Cash couldn't tell anyone of his accomplishment until years later because of the top-secret nature of his job, and eventually the fact would just become a footnote of history to Johnny's more famous musical efforts. It was while at Landsberg that Cash wrote Folsom Prison Blues, one of his most popular songs, comparing life on a restricted base to being in the clink.
The U.S. and Israel are having a very public fallout, with Biden yesterday saying that Israel was losing support because of its, quote, indiscriminate bombing of Gaza, with Biden adding that Israel can't say no to a Palestinian state and he has to make moves to strengthen the Palestinian Authority. He also added that Netanyahu must change. And then not long after, Netanyahu responded with a video where he rejected Biden's two-state solution and said Israel will occupy Gaza indefinitely, and adding that Gaza will neither be, quote, Hamas-stan or Fatah-stan. And the Israeli comms minister doubling down on Netanyahu's statement and saying there will be no Palestinian state and they will never allow one. And this is yesterday the UAE told the Wall Street Journal that they won't help rebuild Gaza unless there is a viable U.S.-backed path toward a two-state solution. And so U.S. frustration with Netanyahu is approaching an all-time high as he disrupts their attempts to rally their Arab allies around a two-state solution and the rebuilding of Gaza. And so with this, you have people pointing back to Bill Clinton in 1996, where after meeting Netanyahu, he said, quote, who the fuck does he think he is? Who's the fucking superpower here? A statement that many in the White House are likely asking themselves this week, given that the only thing blocking an internationally mandated ceasefire is the United States.
Next Monday is Memorial Day, a day we honor our nation's freedom by remembering those who sacrificed their lives by getting us that freedom. As President Reagan once said, we are forever indebted to those who have given their lives that we might be free. During remarks at Memorial Day ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery in 1982, President Reagan said,
"Words are even more feeble on this Memorial Day, for the sight before us is that of a strong and good nation that stands in silence and remembers those who were loved and who in return loved their countrymen enough to die for them. Yet we must try to honor them, not for their sakes alone, but for our own. And if words cannot repay the debt we owe these men, surely with our actions, we must strive to keep faith with them and with a vision that led them to battle and a final sacrifice."
He was a sergeant in the fabled 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. His name was Gerald Andy Anderson, and he would see action in Sicily, Italy, D-Day, the Hurtgen Forest, and the Battle of the Bulge. It was at the Battle of Crucifix Hill during the Aachen campaign when Andy was wounded by mortar fire. Though near death, the thing that kept him going was a young lady named Josephine Hillman. Though they only met once before the war, he struck up a correspondence with her, and she sent him a picture while he was recuperating in England. "I kept this picture all that time," he recalled years later. "I carried it on my web belt in my boot, even my helmet liner. When he returned to Chicago, Josephine was waiting for him. She remained the love of his life till her death after 47 years of marriage. When Andy passed in 2022, Josephine's picture was buried with him." With her husband having recently shipped out to the Pacific, the 18-year-old took a job at a munitions plant to pass the time and make ends meet. It was 1944, and working 60 hours a week, she helped make radio-controlled planes that anti-aircraft gunners would use for practice in refining their skills. Introverted, bordering on shy, the young assembly worker won a $50 war bond after being elected queen of the company picnic. She came to the attention of Private David Conover of the Army's 1st Motion Picture Unit, who had been assigned to photograph some new Rosie the Riveter pictures of women in war production. Conover was floored by the natural beauty of the factory worker, and his photos would help launch her modeling career. Norma Jean, as she was called, would eventually straighten her hair, dye it blonde, and take the world by storm as Marilyn Monroe. As for Conover's commanding officer who gave him the assignment, he was Captain Ronald Reagan.
Imagine an outpost near Dingalan Bay. The day is about to break when suddenly about 100 Japanese soldiers launch a stealth attack. 3 Americans man a light machine gun position. Private McKinney is struck on the head by an enemy soldier. Dazed but defiant, he seized his rifle and bludgeoned his attacker and shot another charging at him. Private McKinney then faces 10 infantrymen intending to use their captured machine gun against him. With courage undeterred, McKinney shot 7 at point-blank range and killed 3 more with his rifle butt. His machine gun now useless, he relies solely on his rifle. Dodging grenades and mortar shells, he secures more ammunition and holds his ground. Hand-to-hand combat, devastating gunfire. He repels wave after wave of the enemy. When help arrives, he's in complete control of the area. The toll? 38 dead Japanese around the machine gun, 2 more at a distant mortar. This is Private John Randolph McKinney, Medal of Honor recipient.
Can an F-22 land on an aircraft carrier? The F-22 may dominate in air-to-air combat, but it was simply not designed to land on a moving ship. The F-22 does have a tailhook, but it's not made for carrier landings, meaning their best bet would probably be a barricade landing. And to have any chance of that, the pilot would have to get their speed down to 100 knots. But even if they got their speed down, the landing gear would never stand up to the brutal shock of slamming a 45,000-pound monster onto the flight deck. The landing gear would be ripped off as the rest of the plane broke apart in a potentially catastrophic fire. Plus, just try getting clearance to land. No sane commanding officer would ever risk ruining his flight deck for such a terrifying experiment. So, if for some reason an F-22 pilot was forced to do a carrier landing, they might survive if they're lucky, particularly if they were a Navy pilot. But the plane would probably never fly again.
And that was the military shorts. Back in a minute. Good morning. It's Wednesday, Thank you. So Bishop Barron has responded to Pope Francis's allowing that there be given blessings to people that are involved in same-sex marriages or same-sex relationships. Now, he says that it's okay, or that it's in giving or in keeping with church teachings, because that's the controversy within the church, that it's in keeping with church teachings because it's not a liturgical blessing, it's a pastoral blessing. So the Pope managed to find a loophole, let's say. And so he's exploiting that loophole to give blessings to people that really don't deserve it. Now, the reason that we have this situation, the reason we have this problem is because a long time ago, it was when we had gay activists, people from GLAAD, that were attacking the church, particularly the Catholic Church. Their phrase that they were always repeating was, I thought God loves everybody. Okay. Doesn't God love everybody? And so that put the church on the spot. A lot of people on the church on the spot, and a lot of laymen and church leaders and whatnot put them on the spot. And what they're doing, the trick here is they're asking you to prove the status quo. Okay, it's the same thing as saying, why does it have to be like this? Or does it have to be like this? It's a non-question. It's something that I don't have to bother to answer. Because the real question is, why should it be any other way? Okay, that's what you have to remember. You don't have to prove the status quo. The true conservative has nothing to prove to anyone ever at any time. Okay, so the status quo is that people that are involved in same-sex relationships cannot be a member of the church. They're not going to get their union blessed liturgically. They're not going to be part of the church as long as they have that relationship. Now, when somebody says, but doesn't God love me, if they happen to be gay, or if they say, well, doesn't God love everybody, then you have to turn it around. That's the way you defeat this trick, is you turn it around and say, don't you love God? Boom, and that shuts them up right like that. If they do answer, well, of course I do, then you say, then why do you want to defy God? Why do you want to defy His will? Why do you want to disappoint, frustrate God? So, and that again, that shuts them up. They're the ones that have to prove. Always remember that. The people that want change have the burden of proof. Always and forever. Pope Francis hasn't realized that. Pope Francis keeps thinking that he and the church have to justify church doctrine, and then not only justify it, it's one thing to justify it to the layman in the church, but it's another thing to justify it to atheists, because the people that are attacking the church, they're not churchgoers, they're not people that believe in God, they're atheists, they're pagans. So I have nothing to justify to them at all, period. Remember that the atheists also have the burden of proof. Religion is the status quo, whether it's Catholicism, Protestantism, Hinduism, Muslim, Judaism, going back as far as time immemorial, there's been religion. The religion is the status quo. The people that say no religion have the burden of proof. They're the ones that have to prove that God does not exist. Not me. I don't have to prove that God does. You, if you're an atheist, got to prove that God doesn't. So remember, this is a burden of proof issue, and the people that want change always have the burden of proof. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 strategies of war.
Chapter 4. Create a sense of urgency and desperation. The Death Ground Strategy. You are your own worst enemy. You waste precious time dreaming of the future instead of engaging in the present. Since nothing seems urgent to you, you are only half involved in what you do. The only way to change is through action and outside pressure. Put yourself in situations where you have too much at stake to waste time or resources. If you cannot afford to lose, you won't. Cut your ties to the past. Enter unknown territory where you must depend on your wits and energy to see you through. Place yourself on death ground, where your back is against the wall and you have to fight like hell to get out alive. The no-return tactic. In 1504, an ambitious 19-year-old Spaniard named Hernán Cortés gave up his studies in law and sailed for his country's colonies in the New World. Stopping first in Santo Domingo, the island today comprising Haiti and the Dominican Republic, then in Cuba, he soon heard about a land to the west called Mexico, an empire teeming with gold and dominated by the Aztecs, with their magnificent highland capital of Tenochtitlan. From then on, Cortés had just one thought. Someday he would conquer and settle the land of Mexico. Over the next 10 years, Cortés slowly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming secretary to the Spanish governor of Cuba, and then the king's treasurer for the island. In his own mind, though, he was merely biding his time. He waited patiently while Spain sent other men to Mexico, many of them never to return. Finally, in 1518, the governor of Cuba, Diego de Velázquez, made Cortés the leader of an expedition to discover what had happened to these earlier explorers, find gold, and lay the groundwork for the country's conquest. Velázquez wanted to make that future conquest himself, however, so for this expedition he wanted a man he could control, and he soon developed doubts about Cortés. The man was clever, perhaps too much so. Word reached Cortés that the governor was having second thoughts about sending him to Mexico. Deciding to give Velázquez no time to nurse his misgivings, he managed to slip out of Cuba in the middle of the night with 11 ships. He would explain himself to the governor later. The expedition landed on Mexico's east coast in March 1519. Over the next few months, Cortés put his plans to work, founding the town of Veracruz, forging alliances with local tribes who hated the Aztecs, and making initial contact with the Aztec emperor, whose capital lay some 250 miles to the west. But one problem plagued the conquistador. Among the 500 soldiers who had sailed with him from Cuba were a handful who had been placed there by Velázquez to act as spies and make trouble for him if he exceeded his authority. These Velázquez loyalists accused Cortés of mismanaging the gold that he was collecting, and when it became clear that he intended to conquer Mexico, they spread rumors that he was insane, an all too convincing accusation to make about a man planning to lead 500 men against 500,000 Aztecs, fierce warriors known to eat their prisoners' flesh and wear the skins as trophies. A rational man would take the gold they had, return to Cuba, and come back later with an army. Why stay in this forbidding land with its diseases and its lack of creature comforts when they were so heavily outnumbered? Why not sail for Cuba, back home where their farms, their wives, and the good life awaited them? Cortés did what he could with these troublemakers, bribing some, keeping a close eye on others. Meanwhile, he worked to build a strong enough rapport with the rest of his men that the grumblers could do no harm. All seemed well until the night of July 30th, when Cortés was awoken by a Spanish sailor who, begging for mercy, confessed that he had joined in a plot to steal a ship and return that very evening to Cuba, where the conspirators would tell Velázquez about Cortés's goal of conquering Mexico on his own. Cortés sensed that this was the decisive moment of the expedition. He could easily squash the conspiracy, but there would be others. His men were a rough lot, and their minds were on gold, Cuba, their families, anything but fighting the Aztecs. He could not conquer an empire with men so divided and untrustworthy, but how to fill them with the energy and focus for the immense task he faced. Thinking this through, he decided to take swift action. He seized the conspirators and had the 2 ringleaders hanged. Next, he bribed his pilots to bore holes in all of the ships, and then announced that worms had eaten through the boards of the vessels, making them unseaworthy. Pretending to be upset at the news, Cortés ordered what was salvageable from the ships to be taken ashore, and then the hulls to be sunk. The pilots complied, but not enough holes had been bored. Only 5 of the ships went down. The story of the worms was plausible enough, and the soldiers accepted the news of the 5 ships with equanimity. But when, a few days later, more ships were run aground, and only 1 was left afloat, it was clear to them that Cortés had arranged the whole thing. When he called a meeting, their mood was mutinous and murderous. This was no time for subtlety. Cortés addressed his men. He was responsible for the disaster, he admitted. He had ordered it done. But now, there was no turning back. They could hang him, but they were surrounded by hostile Indians and had no ships. Divided and leaderless, they would perish. The only alternative was to follow him to Tenochtitlan. Only by conquering the Aztecs, by becoming lords of Mexico, could they get back to Cuba alive. To reach Tenochtitlan, they would have to fight with utter intensity. They would have to be unified. Any dissension would lead to defeat and a terrible death. The situation was desperate, but if the men fought desperately in turn, Cortés guaranteed that he would lead them to victory. Since the army was so small in number, the glory and riches would be all the greater. Any cowards not up to the challenge could sail the 1 remaining ship home. No one accepted the offer, and the last ship was run aground. Over the next months, Cortés kept his army away from Veracruz and the coast. Their attention was focused on Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. The grumbling, the self-interest, and the greed all disappeared. Understanding the danger of their situation, the conquistadors fought ruthlessly. Some 2 years after the destruction of the Spanish ships, and with the help of their Indian allies, Cortés's army laid siege to Tenochtitlan and conquered the Aztec Empire. Interpretation. On the night of the conspiracy, Cortés had to think fast. What was the root of the problem he faced? It was not Velázquez's spies, or the hostile Aztecs, or the incredible odds against him. The root of the problem was his own men and the ships in the harbor. His soldiers were divided in heart and mind. They were thinking about the wrong things. Their wives, their dreams of gold, their plans for the future. And in the backs of their minds, there was always an escape route. If this conquest business went badly, they could go home. Those ships in the harbor were more than just transportation. They represented Cuba, the freedom to leave, the ability to send for reinforcements, so many possibilities. For the soldiers, the ships were a crutch, something to fall back on if things got ugly. Once Cortés had identified the problem, the solution was simple: destroy the ships. By putting his men in a desperate place, he would make them fight with utmost intensity. A sense of urgency comes from a powerful connection to the present. Instead of dreaming of rescue or hoping for a better future, you have to face the issue at hand. Fail, and you perish. People who involve themselves completely in the immediate problem are intimidating. Because they are focusing so intensely, they seem more powerful than they are. Their sense of urgency multiplies their strength and gives them momentum. Instead of 500 men, Cortés suddenly had the weight of a much larger army at his back. Like Cortés, you must locate the root of your problem. It is not the people around you. It is yourself and the spirit with which you face the world. In the back of your mind, you keep an escape route, a crutch, something to turn to if things go bad. Maybe it is some wealthy relative you can count on to buy your way out. Maybe it is some grand opportunity on the horizon, the endless vistas of time that seem to be before you. Maybe it is a familiar job or a comfortable relationship that is always there if you fail. Just as Cortés's men saw their ships as insurance, you may see this fallback as a blessing. But in fact, it is a curse. It divides you. Because you think you have options, you never involve yourself deeply enough in one thing to do it thoroughly, and you never quite get what you want. Sometimes you need to run your ships aground, burn them, and leave yourself just one option: succeed or go down. Make the burning of your ships as real as possible. Get rid of your safety net. Sometimes you have to become a little desperate to get anywhere. By Niccolo Machiavelli.
And that was the first part of Chapter 4, Create a Sense of Urgency, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
At the heart of evangelization, everybody, is this. It's sharing an experience of the power of Christ. If it's just arguments, that can strike people as empty words. Rather, the greatest evangelist is the one who says, I've been healed by my contact with this Jesus, and now I want you to have the same experience. Evangelization is one starving person telling another where to find bread.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "It is time to clarify in the public mind the pernicious confusion which was created by Marxism and which most people have unthinkingly accepted. The notion that economic controls are the proper function of government, that government is a tool of economic class interests, and that the issue is only which particular class or pressure group shall be served by the government. The idea or possibility of an uncontrolled economy has been entirely forgotten and is now being deliberately ignored." Unquote. What she's talking about here fundamentally that she doesn't realize is government rights. And there are no government rights. Back in a minute. And thank you. And now, SEAL Team 6.
15. Ambassador death threats. Although still experiencing daily pain and sleepless nights from my injuries, I recovered to the point that I could receive an assignment to protect Ambassador to the Philippines John Negroponte, who had received some death threats. A Yale graduate, he dropped out of Harvard Law School to become a diplomat. Of Greek descent, he spoke English, French, Greek, Spanish, and Vietnamese. With me from Team 6 came Johnny. He had been stationed in the Philippines before, possibly on a deployment with SEAL Team 1, and had a lot of friends, many of them female. He had volunteered for the assignment to have some fun. Johnny always had a lighthearted attitude. We were living in a condo on the 10th floor of a building in Makati, an upscale neighborhood in Manila. One evening, an earthquake hit. It woke us up, along with our maid, Lucy. Johnny and I both came out of our rooms, he in his boxer shorts and I in my birthday suit. Outside the window, buildings swayed side to side. I could feel our building sway, too. "What do you want to do?" I asked. Johnny had that big smile on his face. "Nothing we can do, just sort it out when we hit the ground." We laughed it off and went back to bed. Our job included training Philippine nationals, some from the Philippine National Police Force, to protect the ambassador. We showed the Filipinos how to do diplomatic advances, run a 3-vehicle motorcade, walk a detail diamond, one agent walking point, one on each side of the principal, and one bringing up the rear, and more. We took them out to shoot with their Uzis. Uzis are poor weapons for accuracy, and the Philippine nationals were poor marksmen with any weapon. The ambassador was fortunate they didn't have to shoot anyone to protect his life. Our recommendation to the assistant regional security officer was to let Filipinos carry shotguns instead of Uzis so they had a better chance of hitting something. The change wasn't made. Sitting down with the commandant and assistant regional security officer and drawing on my experiences running a CIA safe house in Somalia, we came up with an improved defense and E&E plan for the embassy. Also, we took the Marine Embassy guards out to the range for shooting practice. Hey, we're Marines, we know how to shoot. After spending a few days on the range with Johnny and me, the Marines' eyes opened up. Good stuff. Ambassador Negroponte never seemed to stop, always meeting with people, and he played tennis well. He treated us like we were part of the family. I felt close to his children, whom we also protected. His British wife was polite and sweet. They invited Johnny and me to Thanksgiving dinner at the American residence in Bagayo, a mansion complete with chandeliers and oil paintings. One day Johnny and I did an advance for the ambassador's visit to a chiropractor. I wore my Oakley sunglasses. We walked up to the front desk and introduced ourselves. The receptionist invited us in. As we searched rooms for bad guys, we interrupted the chiropractor during her lunch. We apologized and continued on. Later, we received a call from the ambassador asking us to see him. We left our condo in Makati and met with him. He politely told us, "Next time you go to the chiropractor's office, don't go all roughshod. That chiropractor also happens to be a friend." This was before 9/11, so security was less of a priority, but we had done our advance the way we were trained. He explained, "I have a shoulder injury from tennis, and if she doesn't realign my spine, I'm in pain." I was skeptical about chiropractors and didn't think they would be effective in easing the constant pain I had in my leg and neck, but I filed our conversation in the back of my mind anyway. At the embassy, Johnny and I met a middle-aged American doctor who feared for his life. "I'm doing charity work as a doctor, just trying to help people, and the mob is trying to rob and kill me." "How do you know?" "They're following me. People call my hotel, checking if I'm there. They're at the hotel waiting for me." Johnny and I told the assistant regional security officer, Arso, working for the State Department, "We think the mob is really going to kill this guy." Johnny and I wore civilian clothes. Not wanting to stick out like Secret Service agents or diplomatic security, we didn't carry radios. I like to wear khaki Royal Robbins pants because they're easy to run in, have a lot of pockets, and look nice. Over a navy blue t-shirt, I wore a photographer's vest with a pair of binoculars and a blowout kit in the pockets. In a pancake holster on my hip was my Sig Sauer, which held one 15-round magazine. In the mag holder on my belt, I carried 2 more magazines. Over the vest, I wore an unbuttoned button-down shirt, concealing my pistol and spare magazines. Leaving the doctor at the embassy, the two of us ran a mini counter-surveillance of the doctor's hotel. It wasn't a high-class place like the Intercontinental, but it wasn't a dive either. 3 blocks away from his hotel, Johnny and I stood on one of the top floors of the building. I called the hotel's front desk and introduced myself as working for diplomatic security. Explaining the situation, I asked the desk clerk to open the curtains in the doctor's room. Also, I told him what I looked like and what time I'd arrive. When the curtains opened, we could see inside with the binoculars we'd brought from the team. Pocket-sized, waterproof Bausch & Lomb, now licensed with Bushnell, with anti-glare coating, enhanced light transmission, and high-color contrast. No one seemed to be waiting in the room. I felt relieved that we wouldn't have to do a forced entry and get into a gun battle. The desk clerk verified that no one was inside. So far, so good. Then again, he could be setting us up. We moved in a wide square around the hotel area, looking for anyone running surveillance. Then we moved in closer toward the hotel, making concentric squares. A junky old vehicle sat in front of the hotel with 2 guys in it. My spider senses tingled. These are the 2 guys I need to look out for. They weren't dressed like businessmen and didn't seem to be there to pick anyone up. No one else in the area seemed to be a threat. Johnny and I parked our Jeep Cherokee near the corner of the building where he could see the doctor's room above and the thugs in front of him. I transferred my Sig Sauer from my holster to my vest pocket, keeping my hand on it with my finger near the trigger. Then I stepped out of our vehicle and walked to the hotel. Inside the lobby, my eyes scanned for anyone or anything out of place. At that point in my career, I could take a glance at people, note their posture and body language, and know if they were a threat. Part of my awareness seemed to be a heightened sixth sense, like when you think somebody is watching you and you turn around to find out somebody really is watching you. The desk clerk, probably a relative of the hotel owner, escorted me to the stairway. An elevator can be a death trap. It can be stopped between floors. There could be somebody on top of the elevator. It doesn't just happen in movies. Or a big surprise could be waiting when the elevator opens. If this was a setup, the desk clerk would become more nervous as we neared the doctor's room. He would know he stood a good chance of getting killed during an ambush. If the ambush didn't kill him, I would. We entered the stairway. I drew my pistol and bladed the stairs as we walked up, scanning the overhead for a muzzle or someone about to drop a brick on our heads, then scanning the stairs in front of me. As we reached the 4th floor, I was going to ask the clerk to walk out in front of me, but he already had. He led me through the hallway and unlocked the doctor's door. Inside the room, I locked the door behind us, including the bar latch. I didn't want any surprise visitors from behind. The clerk went to the center of the room and began packing up the doctor's belongings. Perfect. If anyone was going to attack us, they'd go after the clerk first. Also, his relaxed state gave me further evidence that he wasn't setting me up. I searched the room for boogeymen, shower, closets, under the bed, everywhere. When everything was clear, I closed one curtain halfway over the window, signaling Johnny we were in and all was clear. Maybe I could have waved at him from the window, but I didn't take the chance of eating a sniper's bullet. If I hadn't given the signal within 5 minutes after leaving Johnny, he'd have been coming to back me up. The clerk packed a rolling suitcase, a garment bag, and a briefcase full of U.S. currency. I wondered how the doctor had acquired the stacks of money, thousands of dollars from what I could see. Maybe he brought the cash from the States to survive on. Maybe he'd been involved in something he shouldn't have been. After the clerk finished packing everything, he carried the luggage down the stairs. Feeling more comfortable, I still had my weapon out, but wasn't aiming at every potential hazard. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, I put the pistol back in my pocket. I quickly looked around the lobby. Everything seemed okay. I thanked the clerk and took the luggage. After hooking the garment bag to the suitcase, I pulled it with my left hand while carrying the briefcase in my right. When I exited the hotel, the 2 thugs saw me. They seemed to know what I was there for, and they seemed to know that I knew what they were there for. Is it worth it for you to try taking me down? If they made a move, I'd have to drop the briefcase in my right hand and draw my pistol from my pocket. I could move while shooting, and they would be confined to their vehicle. If they tried it, I'd make them have a bad day. Even so, my anus puckered. Johnny brought up the Jeep Cherokee and stopped at an angle behind them. If they wanted to get out and shoot at the Jeep, they'd have to get out and turn, without their door as a shield between them and us. Johnny stepped out with his weapon drawn and held down at his side. The door shielded his lower body from the direction of the 2 thugs. Johnny's presence gave me peace of mind. I walked past the thugs, threw the luggage in the back, and sat down in the passenger seat. The thugs had cranked their heads around to look at us, becoming highly animated, speaking rapidly back and forth. Johnny drove us out and circled the block, and when we returned, the 2 thugs were gone. We picked up the doctor at the embassy, gave him his luggage, and took him to a U.S. commissary in Manila where they had shopping and a restaurant. We kept him there until his flight was ready to leave. He thanked us over and over again. As we drove the doctor to the airport, we had another of our vehicles drive out front to make sure the route was clear. "You 2 saved my life." He continued to thank us. We loaded the doctor onto a plane. Later, he wrote the embassy thanking them for our help, which resulted in big kudos for us. We found out later that the doctor had been dating a mob boss's daughter. She lost her virginity to him, and he promised to marry her, even though he had plans to leave the country. When the mob boss discovered this, he put a contract out on the doctor. Maybe he deserved it. I'd come a long way in recovering from my wounded leg. I still had daily pain and sleepless nights, though, and the diplomatic security assignment was an easy job as far as SEAL Team 6 assignments went. A cakewalk. I knew I wouldn't be able to work the tough assignments again. After completing the diplomatic security assignment, I returned to the team. We did our routine workups, running, kill house, shooting range. I realized this isn't going to work out. I spoke to 6's Command Master Chief. I'm going to pack my stuff and head to Georgia. I'm in constant pain. My leg throbs all day. A lot of hip pain. Neck pain. I can't sleep too well. At the time, I didn't know what was wrong with me. Having adjusted for my gunshot wound by changing my gait, I was carrying myself wrong. My externally rotated foot was affecting my hip. My neck compensated by going the other way. Sort of like a house. If the basement tilts to the right and sinks a little, the roof follows, except the neck pulls the opposite way. I understand exactly where you're coming from. If you want, I'll transfer you to any team you want. Send you to Buds to be an instructor. You can pick a division here. Air ops, boat ops, demo, whatever you want to do. Just tell me and it's yours. I'd never be able to do what my teammates were doing. I remembered going up the stairs in the kill house, holding up the last 3 guys in the train. That had never happened to me before. I knew when I was at the top of my game. Now, I was not. It was a harsh reality to face. I'm not as good, not as fast, and my senses are not as keen as they used to be. Definitely not physically doing what I used to do. Thank you, Master Chief, but if I'm not going to be one of the team guys doing the job, I'd rather just get on with the next phase of my life. Do something different. See what's out there. Most of my adult life I had been in the military. It would be a new adventure. What can I do in the civilian world?
And that was Chapter 15, Ambassador Death Threats, from SEAL Team 6. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.